into the fun stuff, which is Canadian immigration. So first, I'm going to talk about immigration at a glance. I feel like this is something super basic, super helpful that a lot of people don't know, and it puts a lot of this stuff into really good perspective for people, right? When you hear about all these visas and permits and statuses, and I just wanted to summarize all of it at the very beginning so we know where to start. So first of all, I'm going to explain there are generally three kinds of immigration statuses in Canada. The first one is called temporary status. All right, so think about this as the bottom first step of the ladder, right? This is where you're coming to Canada, usually for a shorter period of time, can be anywhere from a few weeks to a few years, depending on your permit. And you're coming to do one of three things or a combination: to study, to work, or to visit, right? So you might hear the words study permit, study visa, work permit, work visa, visitor visa, TRV, visitor visa. These all actually mean the same thing, right? So the term visa and permit are often used interchangeably in Canada. So what I mean by this is a study permit is the same as a study visa. A work permit is the same as a work visa. Visitor visa is the same as a visitor permit. They all mean the same thing. What's most important to know is that these are temporary statuses, and you're coming to do that thing listed on the permit, right? So as many of you know, a study permit allows you to come and study at a particular college or university in Canada. You can also often work part-time up to 20 hours per week while you're a student, but primarily you are coming to study. A work permit is for those who are primarily working in Canada. A visitor allows you to come, visit, travel, but you typically, in most cases, cannot study or work while on a visitor visa, right? So this is kind of the baseline of those three types of visas/permits. Now, taking one step up to the next level, we have what's called permanent residence, PR. I'm sure many of you have heard this term thrown around a lot with regards to immigration. Permanent residence, we're going to talk about it a little bit in this presentation as well, but it's a step up from being a temporary resident, right? As a permanent resident, you can now do everything that we just mentioned above. You can study at any school, you can work for any company, you can visit any parts of the country, and typically PR you're given for a period of 5 years, and then it's quite easy to renew it as well, or do what we'll talk about next in the next step. But what's great about permanent residence is you unlock a lot of flexibility, right? So you no longer have to worry about your study permit expiring or your work permit expiring, et cetera, et cetera. You get your PR, you're good for 5 years. As long as you spend 2 of those 5 years physically present in Canada, it's quite easy to renew it. You don't have to worry about getting a new work permit to work with a new employer or something like that. So getting PR is really, really good. All right, the third status, I'm not really going to talk about it in this presentation because most of you are at least 2 to 3 years away from even thinking about this. But citizenship is the top on the ladder, right? You get the Canadian passport, you can pretty much, act like any other Canadian would. Travel becomes a whole lot easier. You get the benefits of having the Canadian passport. This is something I would not worry about right now if I were you. I would focus on the first two. And worry about citizenship when the time comes. But I did want to put this into perspective as kind of like the three general statuses. All right, so let's talk about the immigration journey for you, right? Right now, you're probably on a study permit is my guess for most of you. There are then kind of two traditional routes if you want to use, to kind of work your way towards PR. I'm assuming most of you ultimately want to get PR. Maybe you do or don't want to get citizenship. It doesn't really matter for the purposes of this presentation. But there's typically one of these two routes you're going to take. Either you're going to graduate and apply for a work permit. This can be open or closed, and then work your way towards PR. Some of you may be able to apply for PR right away. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when I talk about PR. But it's generally speaking going to be one of those two routes. It's probably going to be the first of those options for most of you. And then, of course, you can think about citizenship down the road. So let's talk about how to get there, right? So let's first talk about work permits. There's two types of work permits. There are closed work permits, and these are typically employer-based, meaning a company will generally sponsor you through something like an LMIA, or maybe not if you're exempt, and you get a closed work permit, meaning you can only work for that one company listed on the work permit. So similar to how most of you have a study permit that only allows you to study at that specific school and program. A closed work permit only allows you to work at that specific company. And obviously, these are not very flexible, right? It's not ideal. If you want to change schools, if you want to change employers, it's kind of a pain in the ass, which is why they're not as good as the second type of permit, which is an open work permit. This allows you to work for any company that you'd like in Canada. That's obviously a really good thing. The most popular and well, maybe not most popular, but the most applicable open work permit that we're going to talk about today is called the Post-Grad work permit. This allows you, once you graduate, to apply, get the PGWP for short, which I'll probably be calling it throughout this presentation, and allows you to work in Canada. You want to aim for the second option. Why? For two reasons. Number one, PGWP for you folks will actually be easier to get because you don't need an employer to sponsor you. And number two, the flexibility, right? Maybe you get a better job a few months down the road. Now you don't have to apply for a new work permit just to be able to start working. So let's talk about the post-grad work permit in a little bit more detail, because probably 99% of you are going to want to apply for this once you graduate. So what is a post-grad work permit? You can get a post-grad work permit if you've completed a Canadian academic, vocational, or professional training program at an eligible institution of 8+ months, resulting in a degree, diploma, or certificate. Don't worry, that's a big convoluted sentence with big words. I'm going to break it down into a little bit more detail to what you have to know. You have to have maintained full-time student status during each academic session. There are some COVID exemptions, so I'll talk about that at the end. And then you have to apply for it within 180 days of receiving written confirmation showing either your final marks are issued or notification that you've completed your program. So all of this is basically to say that you've completed a program of more than 8 months and that you maintained full-time student status. There are some exemptions because of COVID. And then within 180 days of either getting your final marks or getting notification that you completed the program, you applied for this, right? So you can't wait a year or you can't wait, 10 months and then apply for the post-grad work permit, which is why we're talking about it right now, because once you graduate, you're going to want to prepare to submit it as soon as possible. Now, what is an eligible institution? These are called DLIs, designated learning institutions. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about these because I already did the homework and looked up that if you are studying on one of these campuses at Centennial, then it is considered a DLI and you would be considered eligible for the post-grad work permit. So if you're at any of these campuses at the bottom, Ashton B, Morningside, Progress Campus and Student Residence, the Center for Creative Communications, or Main Campus, then you are considered studying at a DLI. And you should, so assuming you're completing a program of 8 months or longer, then you should have a very strong chance of getting a post-grad work permit. A couple common questions I get asked: can I work while it's processing? So if you submit the post-grad work permit application before your study permit expires, you can work full-time if you still had the valid study permit at the time that you submitted your application, which would make sense if you submit it before it expires, and you've completed your program, right? So basically, if you want to think about this as a step-by-step process, it's complete your program, confirm that it's completed either through marks or a letter from your school, submit the post-grad work permit as soon as possible. And the reason you're going to want to submit it as soon as possible is because then you get what's called implied status. Implied status allows you to work even though you don't have your work permit yet. Right? So another great thing about the post-grad work permit is as long as you're eligible and as soon as you submit the application, you can start working for any company you'd like. And that's really good for two reasons. Number one, because I'm sure as many of you know, making money is nice, especially after you've just paid all these international fees. And number two is you can start getting Canadian work experience, which is really important for permanent residency, as I'm going to discuss down the road. The other thing you want to ensure is that you were eligible to work off campus on your study permit and you didn't work more hours than you were allowed to. So most of you should have a condition on your work permit that says you are allowed to work up to 20 hours per week off campus. As long as you have that, you have your implied status and you can start working as soon as you submit your post-grad work permit. Okay, can I travel while it's processing? That's a good question. It's even harder to answer due to COVID. But what you want to keep in mind is a work permit. So of those three visas we talked about at the beginning, the study permit, the work permit, and the visitor visa, the work permit and the study permit are actually not travel documents. They do not allow you to travel into Canada. That's a bit of a misconception. So what you have to keep in mind is if you leave Canada, you can leave Canada whenever you want, right? Assuming that you can gain entry to whatever country you're looking to travel to. But you can only re-enter Canada if you have the necessary travel documents, right? So the two types of travel documents are called TRVs, temporary resident visa, AKA a visitor visa, or an ETA. And you would have been given the appropriate one when you had your initial study permit application approved. So most of you right now probably have a valid travel document, right? Either the TRV, in most cases, that's found in your passport. They kind of stick like a center foil or a counterfoil into your passport, or the ETA you would get online, and you probably printed it off when you went to the airport to travel to Canada. But you're going to need a valid one of those in order to travel back into Canada. What you need to know is that if you apply for your post-grad work permit from inside Canada, they will not renew these travel documents for you. So you have to submit your post-grad work permit application, get it approved, then you want to apply for either a new TRV, or if you have an ETA, I believe they're good for 10 years. So you probably don't need a new ETA, but you will probably need a new TRV. So keep that in mind. The other thing I quickly want to mention here is you want to be extra careful when leaving the country because of COVID. So COVID, which I'm going to talk about at the end of this presentation, has some additional factors to keep in mind before you decide to travel. How long is the post-grad work permit valid for? This completely depends on the length of your program. So if you're doing a program of 8 to 24 months, you will get a post-grad, or I should say 8 to 23 months, you will get a post-grad work permit for the length of your program, right? So if your program's 12 months, you'll get a PGWP for 12 months, 16 months, 16 months. If your program is 2 years or longer, you will get a 3-year post-grad work permit. And then you can see the second half of the chart here as if you did 2 or more programs. Right, so maybe you did 2 programs that are combined less than 2 years. You would get the post-grad work permit for the combined length. If the combined length is 24 or more months, you would get the 23-year, the 3-year post-grad work permit. Now, generally speaking, they will include breaks such as Christmas and summer break when calculating that. So let's say you have, a 2-year program, but you had the summers off. They will still count those summers as calendar months when calculating your post-grad work permit length. Okay, let's talk about some other quick details about the PGWP. It's never valid beyond the validity of your passport. This is very important because if you have to apply for your post-grad work permit soon and your passport is going to expire soon, you want to keep in mind that the post-grad work permit will never be granted for beyond the length of your passport. That's not the end of the world because you can either apply to get a new passport before you submit your PGWP application, or you get your PGWP for the length of your passport, you extend your passport, and then you apply to extend the PGWP. So it's not the end of the world, but keep in mind, if your passport is nearing expiration, you're better off renewing it ASAP and before you apply for your post-grad work permit. Some fees to keep in mind. So the work permit filing fee to the government is $155. You're also going to have to pay the open work permit fee of $100. The biometrics fee I'm going to talk about in just a second because they are actually exempt right now due to COVID. But if you would normally have to do your biometrics, it's $85 a person or $170 if you're including family. Processing times, I just looked this up this morning so I could have the most updated information. The average processing time is 137 days. That's quite long for PGWPs, but it's mainly due to COVID. And because you're getting that implied status, it's actually not the end of the world, right? So you're going to have to wait 3, 4, 5 months, whatever the math is there on 130 divided by 30. But the good thing is, because you have that implied status, you can start working right away anyways. So it's not the end of the world. I also always recommend applying online because it's usually quicker and it's much easier. Saves you on printing, saves you on mail. I have had hiccups with clients in the past where things got lost in the mail and just complete headaches. So I recommend applying online. When to prepare? You want to start preparing closer to when you're going to receive your official letter or transcript, so of actually finishing the program, right? If you still have exams, if you still have summatives, end of year projects, focus on those first. You need to complete your program before you can apply anyways, right? And it doesn't take an overly long amount of time to apply. So focus on finishing your program first, and then once you're closer to actually completing the program, you could submit or start preparing everything. Supporting documentation, you can start gathering ahead of time if you want, copies of passports, pictures, filling out some of the forms, et cetera, et cetera. It's totally up to you. The thing is, it is a relatively straightforward application, especially when compared to the study permit or compared to PR. So I wouldn't stress it too much if you haven't completed your program or your studies yet. I would focus on that first and then deep dive on the PGWP once you finish your program. We also have a complete guide to the Post-Grad work permit in the Visto portal. I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. Now, let's quickly talk about permanent residency, because I'm assuming a lot of you want to aim towards getting there. And realistically, your best bet, especially with a Canadian degree, will be through a program called Express Entry. So this is a PR program targeting skilled workers. It is a points-based online only process. And the reason why that's really cool is because, number one, the online only means that the processing time is relatively quick for a PR process, typically in the 6-month period. And because it's points based, you will have a major benefit with a Canadian degree, because having a Canadian degree gives you bonus points. There's also no job requirement for Express Entry. It can help, but it's not required. So Express Entry is a program you're going to want to kind of keep in mind in the back of your head throughout this process. What will you have to do for PR? So, I said the PGWP is relatively straightforward, and you're going to understand when I explain to you what's needed for Express Entry. Now, Express Entry isn't that confusing, but PGWP is just much more straightforward. You just kind of gather the documents, fill out the forms, and submit it. When it comes to PR, you're going to have to write a language exam. Either the IELTS or the CELPIP. If your primary language is English, you can also write a French exam if you know how to speak French. You may have to get foreign degrees assessed. This kind of depends on your situation. For example, if you have a bachelor's degree from back home or a master's from back home, you could get bonus points from those degrees, but only if you get them assessed. Canadian degrees, you do not need to get assessed. You're also going to need 1 year of skilled work experience. This is why the Post-Grad work permit is so important, because some of you may not already have 1 year of skilled work experience. If you do from back home, that's great. Or if you do from Canada beforehand, that's great. Many of you might not. And that's why the Post-Grad work permit is so important, to help you gain that 1 year of skilled work experience. The key word there is actually skilled, because not every type of job is considered skilled. So you do want to make sure, and I'll point you to a resource that will help you find that out, but you do want to make sure that it is skilled work. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And then some documents, you'll need proof of the work experience. So for example, reference letters, you'll need copies of your degrees, you'll need a police certificate, you'll need a medical exam, et cetera, et cetera. Don't stress about those documents right now, because most of you have to focus on the Post-Grad work permit first, but I do want to kind of give you a general understanding. Preparation for PR kind of depends on your situation. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions asking about PR and when to apply. I usually do. It really depends on, number one, when you become eligible. So when you get that 1 year of skilled work experience. And number two, when your score is high enough, right? You will get more points from scoring better on the language exam, from having more years of work experience, and a few other factors. So depending on when your score is high enough and when you become eligible will determine when you want to apply for PR. Now let's talk about our good friend COVID over here, because COVID is affecting these in a few ways. So firstly, permits are still being processed, right? PGWP, PR, even study permits, they're all still being processed. So you don't have to worry about that. What you do have to worry about is delays, right? So almost across the board, everything is going to see processing delays. So you want to start early. You don't want to wait. You don't want to push things till close to your permit's about to expire. You want to apply early. You want to get everything in as early as possible because it's probably going to be delayed. Biometrics right now are not required. Now, keep in mind, if you're going to apply for PR down the road or a post-grad work permit in a year, this might be different, right? So especially for the purposes of the recording, it's November 30th. As of November 30th, biometrics are not required if you're inside Canada. I believe most or all of you are inside Canada. If you're outside Canada, you'd likely have to give biometrics. But for right now, biometrics are not required, so that's actually a bonus. What you want to keep in mind for the travel restrictions, and I was talking about this a little bit earlier, if you want to leave, let's say you want to go home for the holidays, your school has to be on an approved list in order for you to travel back to Canada. There are a lot of travel restrictions and exemptions in place right now. So you want to be very, very careful if you decide to leave Canada, even if you have a travel document. So the things that you're going to want to keep in mind, if you're planning on leaving Canada and you intend on coming back, number one, you need a travel document, right? Either the TRV or the ETA. Number two, if you're still on a study permit, your school has to be on an approved list with a COVID readiness plan. And what I did is I have the link to this here. I guess I don't even need the link, but I'm going to post the link anyways, and we can double check right now if Centennial is on the list. My bet is it is, because most of the major Canadian colleges and Centennial is on that list. So you don't even have to click that link. Centennial College is on the list. So that means if you're still on your study permit and you want to go home for the holidays, you can. Make sure you have your travel document. Yeah, Shauna says we are. Make sure you have your travel document, and you're just going to want to be very prepared with the right documents and a quarantine plan before trying to travel back into Canada, right? Things are a little bit dicey. I might get this question afterwards, so I'm just going to preemptively give you my opinion, is you can travel home if you want to. Make sure you have your travel documents, of course. It is a risk, right? Technically, you should be allowed back into the country. But one of the other benefits of becoming a Canadian citizen is it's always much easier to travel. What I was told by a mentor of mine years ago is that as long as you're a temporary resident or a permanent resident, there is always a risk that they could turn you away at the border, right? For a wide variety of reasons. So you are taking a risk by leaving and trying to come back. It's kind of situational. I would probably say if it's not crucial to travel home for the holidays, I personally would not. It's a personal decision. If you really want to, if you haven't been home in a long time, if you have your travel document, you can absolutely try, but it is a bit of a risk. So just keep that in mind. Bit of a long-winded answer there, but I do want to give you guys my thorough thoughts and suggestions. So what should you do now, right? You've heard this weird guy talk for about 29 minutes, and I'm going to be wrapping up in just a few, but what should you do now? Number one is you want to focus on graduating, right? And confirming that you're eligible for the post-grad work permit once you finish your program. If not, you might want to start making alternative plans, such as looking to a closed work permit or PR. But I have a feeling that most of you are probably going to be eligible for the PGWP, so you're going to want to prep to apply to that once you complete your program. You can, of course, always talk to a professional. I'll talk about a great resource you can use there if you're confused. But you can always talk to a professional that might be able to kind of better put you on your right path. Or what you can do is check out our free immigration portal that I talked about at visto.ai. So this is free to sign up for. And we basically have a whole bunch of content and guides, including video content on how to apply for the post-grad work permit, how to apply for express entry, how to figure out if you're eligible, how to calculate your score, how to find job offers, all that kind of stuff. Totally free to sign up for. Everything's all in one place. So definitely check it out if you're interested. We also have a Facebook community. So if you sign up on the website, you'll get an invite to the Facebook community. I moderate that. I also go live every week, and I give immigration updates and I answer questions. And then we have additional services in the portal as well. They're totally optional, but if you do want to pay to work with a lawyer or have a lawyer submit your application or anything like that, you can find it all in the portal as well. So with that being said, that is it for the presentation portion. I see we've got a whole pile of questions that I want to get to. So again, you can sign up for free to the Visto portal. It's visto.ai. And now what we'll do is we'll spend the next 30 minutes to answer your questions.